Hello, beloved.
Welcome to the Sacred Sister podcast,
where we normalize the magic and sacralize the mundane.
In this podcast, we open up dialogue on metaphysical subjects, self-healing tools, expanding consciousness, and deepening awareness.
We're here to support you in co-creating a life full of healing, meaning, and magic.
If you're brand new here, welcome and hello. We're so excited to have you here.
If you want to know more what has come before, Season 1 is great for foundation of spiritual practices. Season 2 is focusing on relationships. Season 3 is featuring conscious entrepreneurs who are spearheading their sacred mission.
And now we are in Season 4, where we're bringing fresh perspective to outdated systems and creating sustainable foundations for the new earth that's birthing. Since it's the season of the Emperor, we're going to be mostly focusing on male voices this season.
And the lineup of the season is fire, so make sure to subscribe if you're not already.
I'm your host, Britt, certified self-inquiry and alignment-based smart flow yoga instructor, self-healing song channel, and personal transformation coach, guiding women to gain radical self-awareness in order to reconnect with their most expressive and vibrant self.
And I'm your host, Hanna, a certified astrologer, ordained priestess, and rebirth coach. And I help women integrate past life and ancestral traumas to give birth to their higher self and manifest their wildest dreams into reality.
We're really grateful that you're here.
And together,
we're here to serve as your
Sacred Sister.
Let's dive in. Hello, sacred beings, and welcome to another episode of Sacred Sister Podcast. In today's episode, we open up with medicine guide Ian-Michael Hebert on the topic of sacred plant medicines and the roles they can play in the expansion of our consciousness we're able to experience in these human lives we're leading. Ian is referred to as an orchestrator of space, and some of you might be asking, what the heck does that even mean? And by the end of this episode, rest assured, you'll know exactly how that sentiment perfectly depicts Ian's euphonious cadence and humbly grounded demeanor. This is exactly the type of energy I know I would hope to encounter in the throes of an intense psychedelic experience. So, who is Ian? For the last 18 years, Ian has been a guide for individuals and groups through transformational processes. With the aim of deepening presence, authenticity, and connection, there are an array of modalities he uses to catalyze and awaken consciousness and purpose. Much of Ian's current facilitation work takes place through Holos in Costa Rica, where he offers retreats publicly and privately for those seeking deep and lasting well-being, aided and informed by sacred plant medicine journeys. In this episode, Hanna and I open dialogue with Ian in the fields of why the set and setting intentional approach to psychedelic use yields results that are worlds apart from more carnival party time usage, why psychedelic use is not for everyone, why having guidance is important. We talk about archetypal energies that reside within sacred plant medicines and the uniqueness of their individual consciousnesses and the lessons that they have to teach us. We talk about sacred plant medicine addiction and letting it lead you back to your deepest home, the home within. We talk about water consciousness and prayer and song and expressions of exalted chakra consciousness. And at the end, Ian shares two of his most memorable sacred plant medicine experiences. This is such a juicy, deep, beautiful, vibrant, grounded, humble episode. And I feel like I say this every single episode, but it's just so beautiful to sit back, and Hanna and I have a really sacred approach to each and every one of these episodes where we are not knowing exactly how the interview is going to go. We have a vague idea of the energy that we hope to embody and align with in the interview container with every guest, but honestly, one of the most fun parts of this whole endeavor, Sacred Sister Podcast, is that we are fully open to and allowing of whatever wants to come through us. And it has guided us to some of the most interesting and fascinating conversations that we've had like in our lives. And we just feel so grateful for the attendance and the presence and the devotion of the guests that we have onto this podcast. I really wanted to just breathe life into that sentiment and ground down newer comers to this podcast. We are growing so rapidly. It is so exciting. Sacred Sister Podcast has grown fourfold, 400% since this time last year, and it is just really beautiful to witness this growth happening right before our eyes. So Hanna and I, thank you so much for every single podcast episode share, for every shout out, for every Instagram share. We just thank you for being here. We thank you for intaking this project that is made of so much love and devotion and energy from mine and Hannah's lives. So now we're going to switch gears a little bit and hop over to the human design segment of this intro. I'm so excited that I started offering these. Honestly, it was like a last minute decision, but something that was on my heart for such a long time. Human design is every bit as complex as astrology, and it's another self-knowledge system that we're able to bring the wisdom of into these episodes. So what I love looking at are the human design type and the incarnation cross of our guests, so that you can start feeling into the perception that you have over how you see that energy coming across in our guest. So Ian is a generator. That's his human design type. And generators are known as the builders. They make up about 70% of the world's population. And their strategy, the way they approach life, is to engage with life by waiting for things to come to them so that they can respond. Think of a power generator, like a physical power generator. They are filled with energy, but they wait for their outlets to be plugged into in order to fulfill the task at hand that the person is approaching them for. Generators are the life force of the planet, and they are designed to know themselves by observing what they respond to. Through responding, they experience satisfaction, and their work is their gift to the world. And then we look at the incarnation cross, and the incarnation cross depicts the cross to bear in this life, in this lifetime, the realm of experience that we as individuals wish to experience and come to know and dance with fully in this life. So it can be like a tone for our life. And Ian's incarnation cross is found in the quarter of civilization, where purpose is fulfilled through form. And the cross is the left angle cross of separation. So the person that we see with this is a person with the hindsight and the grace to see the necessity of living together separately in society by embracing the diverse interpretations of experience which normally divide us, aka the civilizing process. I really loved seeing that this is Ian's incarnation cross because although it is not a physical form, the journeys that he is taking people on, it is a piece of form that we are able to intake, which is the plant medicine. And through intaking that form, we are able to see exactly what is said here, the necessity of living together, which is what we're doing here on the planet, separately, which is in the individuated states of our consciousness. And that helps us to embrace the diverse interpretations of experience that normally divide us. How many of us have had psychedelic experiences that we emerge from and we are just feeling so connected to all that is, to the concrete that is outside of our house, to the blades of grass that are coming up through our yard, through the leaves that we have been witnessing breathe. Those of you that have experienced these states, these altered states of consciousness through sacred plant medicine journeys, know what I'm talking about. And I'm so grateful that Ian's journey has looked exactly like it has, because it has led him to this really exalted expression of his unique individuated self. It is so beautiful to behold. So I hope that you enjoyed that, and before we head into Hanna's Inner Blueprint astrology reading for Ian, did you know that with Sacred Sister Podcast expanding into Season 4, we have also expanded in a few other ways? Sacred Sister Podcast now has a devoted Patreon page where sacred beings like yourselves who yearn to sit with Hanna and I more deeply can hop on over to intake additional Sacred Sister content. At this time, patrons who support us can dive into candid post-interview videos with plenty more downloadable content to come. And yes, we are getting a few Sacred Sister trinkets made in the form of pins and stickers, so stay tuned for that. I hope you enjoyed this intro. Please enjoy the episode, and without much more, let's head over to Hanna's Inner Blueprint astrology reading for Ian-Michael Hebert.
Hi, sacred beings. This is your host, Hanna, and we're going to be looking into the inner blueprint of Ian. So I like to use Western astrology here and really look at the main archetypes that Ian has so that you can kind of see how those archetypes are showing themselves. So let's dive in. Ian's sun is in Gemini, conjunct Mercury retrograde. And Gemini is actually ruled by Mercury. So he has here a double Gemini archetype. And that is the archetype of the messenger, the one that is meant to tell stories and share his experiences. With Mercury retrograde, Ian learns by doing. So Mercury retrograde, and we are currently in Mercury retrograde, it is activating the right brain, which means it is more of an intuitive communication, whereas Mercury direct is about learning directly from reading. Mercury retrograde learns from experience. So first does it and then learns from that. And that's their main way of learning. So for Ian, this Mercury retrograde is really beneficial because it actually connects him deeper into his own way of communication. And that is for everybody who has Mercury retrograde in their natal chart. And with his sun in the 10th house, Ian is also meant to build something. Build something new. Build a new system, a new structure. A place where people can connect with their brothers and sisters and share knowledge and information. And then his moon is in Sagittarius in the 4th house. And since his moon is in Sag and his sun is in Gemini, he was born on a full moon. And whenever we have a full moon, the sun and the moon are exact opposites. And with his moon in Sagittarius, for him it is really important to find his own truth. So a lot of times when we have Sagittarius moon, we're coming from a past, from a family that was very specific in their beliefs, very convicted and had a strong faith, at least one parent. And in this particular case, with his sun being in Gemini, he's meant to ask questions. He's meant to see other perspectives. He's meant to learn something new and be flexible in his way of thinking. And so this is where the challenge comes in with him being born on a full moon. There's going to be a time where he goes away from the belief of how he's grown up, but then finds his own truth and through the experiences that he has in the world. And that is what nurtures him and that makes him feel really comfortable. By creating his own truth, he's also sharing that truth with others. And I love how his moon is in the 4th house because that is all about holding space for others, being able to be emotional and intuitive with others. He is a great space holder. That's what he does in the ceremonies. And then interestingly enough, Sagittarius is the travel guide. and his moon is conjunct Neptune, and Neptune literally rules psychedelics. So in his ceremonies where he's a psychedelic travel guide, it's just so beautiful how it is all aligned with his sun and moon, and the sun building these systems, building his community, and building this space where people can go on these beautiful inner journeys. And then his rising sign is in Virgo, and Virgo is focused on the detail. Virgo knows what is missing, knows what needs improvement, knows what systems aren't working anymore and what needs to change. And so Virgo has the power of discernment to say this is right and this is wrong. And also it thrives on routines. His chart ruler, which is the ruler of the rising sign, can be Mercury. That is the traditional ruler of Virgo, but the modern ruler is actually Chiron. So since we already talked about his Mercury retrograde, I'm gonna add in the Chiron here, because it's so beautiful too. His Chiron is in Taurus, conjunct his midheaven. Chiron is the planet of the shaman, the wounded healer, moving through healing. And we have here Taurus, and that is healing the wound of Mother Earth. He calls himself a steward of the land, and he helps other people become that steward of the land as well. And I feel like that is such a beautiful testimony of his Chiron and Taurus, of healing the wounds that we have with Mother Earth and how we used to connect with her or abuse her, and how we're now moving into an age where we deeper connect with her, reconnect and remember where we come from. So if this inspires you to receive your own inner blueprint reading, you can hop onto my website, hannahchristensen.com, and use the code SACREDSIS for a special discount. And also, if you haven't already, make sure you follow us on Instagram at Sacred Sister Podcast. We always have fun quotes, video grabs, audio grabs from our guests, and art, and all kinds of stuff, so that it helps you to sacralize the mundane and normalize the magic in your everyday life. And so that is it from me, and let's hop into the interview now. Take a deep breath, relax, and enjoy.
Oh, sacred sister, a kindred flame, may we light one another. From the ashes rise, oh, we rise, oh, again.
Just really tuning into our bodies here, these sacred vessels, in these times when so many things can be disorienting. There's one location in the universe that we can always tune into to find our grounding, to find our center, to reorient our lives to principles and values that we hold dear. For myself, I use the elements and the directions to reorient my own node of control in the universe to the world around me. And so I'm just going to invite us to really honor the convergence of the elements in our bodies and in the world that make possible the birthing of life on our beautiful planet. So just really feeling yourself sitting, or feeling your feet on the ground if you're standing, recognizing that this earth, the gravity that tethers us here, gives us this sacred opportunity for embodiment. And feeling that element of earth in our own bones, and the way that that's connected all the way to the core of this earth. Feeling that grounding cord all the way through our body, through our feet, through our seat, down into the molten core of this beautiful planet. Anytime we need to feel that sense of solidity, we can tune into that. And then coming up through the molten core of the earth, feeling all the layers, all the strength that supports us every day. And then tuning into the waters that are resting in the ocean basins, in the lakes, in the creeks, feeling the way that our bones support our own body, the way that the streams of this world move through our own veins, the pulsing of our heartbeat, all the water that flows through us, to us, and beyond us, interconnecting us with everything on earth. In some ways, we are just vessels for water's project, which is life. And then tuning in to our breath. With each breath, we are honoring this grand cycle between the animal kingdom and the plant kingdom, the carbon and oxygen, all the other gases that are our playground as human beings. Each breath, a dance between us and the whole plant kingdom. And feeling the way that that breath stokes the fire inside of us, that spark of life that transmutes anything within us that needs to be burned away. Feeling gratitude for that element of fire that warms our homes, it supports our communities, our civilization, and recognizing that fire can both be disruptive and destructive, and also when we're in right relationship to the fire within ourselves and in the world, that it can provide warmth and be the hearth for ourselves and our civilization. And recognizing that the intermingling of these four elements in our bodies creates a perfect container for spirit to flow into the world. Recognizing that the dance of these four elements on earth gives rise to life. The blossoming of consciousness here on this sacred planet, Gaia. Thank you, Mama Gaia, for being this exquisite container with so many textures of beauty, divine playground for us to grow and to share and to connect. And thank you, Sacred Sisters, for the invitation to be here with your listeners and to share that little meditation and honoring of our bodies and how they reflect this beautiful earth.
Wow. So beautiful. Thank you. What a channel you are. So beautiful. I love how you were also talking about Mama Gaia. I've never heard anyone else saying Mama Gaia, and that's how I refer to her too. Oh, so beautiful. So welcome. Thank you for being here, Ian. This is so fun to have you here. We're so excited to dive into this conversation with you about sacred plant medicine and living in sync with nature and Mama Gaia, and how we can really bring that groundedness into our everyday life. And on your website, it says you are the orchestrator of space, which I find so beautifully said. And your formal education is in eco-resort design and development. And you also have an MA in counseling psychology with a focus on community mental health. And so it seems like you're taking all of that into your business, Hollows. Is that how you pronounce it?
Mm-hmm.
And your mission is to help support people in experiencing a new way of being in oneself, in relationships, and in the world through education, community, and sacred plant medicine experiences.
Mm-hmm. Yep, that pretty much sums it up.
So beautiful. So how did it all start for you? How did you get into this field of yours, and how did it transform into what it is now?
Yeah, thank you for that question. And I could go all the way back to the genesis of time and space and when we separated from the unity state of consciousness. But I think just, for the sake of this podcast, I'll probably start in my own childhood in this life. I grew up in Alaska and was very much connected to the land there. And my parents were very much back to the land people and home builders and teachers and artists. And so I really learned and had instilled in me from a young age the value of communion with nature. And nature became a real solace for me when I had periods of challenge, depression, or anxiety, or just trying to figure out my own identity in the world. I could turn to nature, and nature was always a really true reflection. It's like nature doesn't really care too much about the human project. It's going to keep going. Life is going to keep living. And no matter what we do to it, and if we extinct ourselves, nature and life is going to continue on. And so it just is kind of that neutral, loving, but fierce witness of our human dance. And so from a young age, I wanted to continue on that legacy that I kind of grew up in, of being in communion with soil and planting our own food. And I decided after a number of psychedelic experiences in my teenage years that I wanted to be a vegetarian. And so I realized that Alaska was probably not the ideal place to be a vegetarian and to live in a sustainable way. And so I hitchhiked to Mexico when I was 18 in search of the promised land, in search of a place where I could live in communion with nature and to grow food. And so it actually took 20 years until now to really start to fully realize that dream in Costa Rica. And in the meantime, I went through all these different chapters in the last 20 years, a chapter as a father and a home builder in Alaska, a chapter of helping rebuild Esalen in Big Sur, a chapter of going to grad school. And oh, I'm so glad this little beauty is joining us. Hi.
You want to say hi?
Hi.
This is
Hi.
Emma.
Hi, Emma. And I
Sorry,
always
go
had this,
ahead.
no, it's great. I always had this dream of, like, living in a place that felt like very nourishing and loving, and also honoring the people that came before me, and the indigenous stewards or the local stewards of a place. And so the basic premise is that if it's a good environment and a good place for my body, and somatically, if I can feel that sense of nervous system release, that there's a pretty good chance that others will experience that as well, or have access to it, and that it'll be a place where we can keep a culture moving forward that really knows what it is to be in reciprocity with the earth and with one another. And so, little people like the one in your arms, the best education they can get is to see it, to see their parents and to see others living in that way. And so I wrote this degree in my early 20s in eco-resort design and development because I thought that the hospitality industry could be a model. They could be little micro villages or places where people could see, oh, this is where you're sourcing your food. This is where you're sourcing your linens. And that it could be an example to people that they could take home. And after being in the world of development for a while, I realized that we also have to really tend to the inner state of ourselves and each other. And I had a number of friends that had committed suicide or struggled with mental health, and my own struggles with depression and different things. So then I moved to San Francisco, did a master's in counseling. And as I completed that master's in counseling, I reemerged into the world of psychedelics. I had taken a 13-year break. And that's where plant medicines really started to speak to me and show me, like basically something I already knew innately, that we're interconnected with all things. And so now I'm at a point where I want to share that with others. And so we're doing that through Holos and running retreats and just living and being an example of it.
So beautiful. Wow. It is such a treat, honestly, just sitting here listening to you. The cadence of your voice is like I'm like having to take really deep breaths and stuff, because I keep feeling like I'm being like lulled very beautifully, gently to like a nappy time right now. Your voice is just so pleasing, euphonious to listen to. Okay, so what I wanted to say is what a beautiful, thank you first off for sharing that story, that beautiful piece of your path and what it's unfolded into. I feel like for myself, and I hope for a lot of the listeners, hearing how integrated you were with nature and still are, and how close to your heart that has been, and how sacred plant medicines have almost kind of naturally sidled their way into your path, I feel like is such a beautiful departure from the way a lot of people look at what they might consider as sacred, what they don't consider as sacred medicine when we talk about the psychedelic trips and stuff like that. So I wonder, for anyone who hasn't experienced any sort of sacred plant medicines or psychedelic trips, or maybe they have that sort of upbringing that they feel very fearful, and that they know, like LSD is a Schedule 1 drug and things like this, can you offer a bit of insight to the ways that these sacred plant medicines are a departure from what we usually think of as like stereotypical drugs, and that are very demonized in the West?
Yeah, absolutely. Uh, there are a lot of cultures that have worked with plants and have really had this communion with particular plants, whether it's or fungus, whether it's ayahuasca, San Pedro, peyote, iboga, and psilocybin. And then there's a lot of other mushrooms that have been used in indigenous ways throughout the world. And this is nothing new. It's just that because of the structures of our civilization feeling threatened by them or wanting to keep control, I feel like that is one of the reasons that things have been scheduled in places like the US or Canada. And we're working diligently as a community to open that up and to share that this isn't something to be afraid of, and it's something to have a lot of respect for. It's like plant medicine is not for everyone. You can open up channels of your psyche that are so big and so powerful that you may not yet have the container in your own consciousness to hold them. And so while I'm an advocate for working with plants as medicine, all kinds of plants, including the sacred teachers, it doesn't mean that it's for everyone. It's kind of like when you go to a doctor, the doctor will choose the medicines that are right for you. And so that's why it's important to have guidance through these things. And I look at it in a relational way. So it's like, let's imagine you're meeting someone new and you're not quite sure about that person. They seem kind of pretty radical and wild, or they seem like really kind of intimidating. It can be that relationship between some people and sacred plant medicine. And then you start to get to know them in a gentle and slow way. And then you realize, oh my gosh, this is like one of the most profound teachers. This is exactly what I'm needing. And each of these plants or fungus can have a different spirit to them too. Like in some cultures, they call ayahuasca grandmother, or, San Pedro grandfather, or psilocybin mushrooms, the niños. And there's ways that the texture of those, there's a way that the texture of those entities actually are represented by that archetype. So like grandfather being kind of like strong, and a gentle grandfather just gives you like a big hug and is really like a warm embrace. And then a more fierce grandfather like gives you a strong lesson. And that's kind of my experience with San Pedro. And similarly, like with ayahuasca, it's like, oh yeah, you think of a sweet grandmother, you know, she's just like really juicy and like yeah, playful. And then maybe a little bit more fierce grandmother is like, oh, here's what you need to learn, and is a little bit more of a wild teacher. So yeah, I think that relating to these sacred plants in a way that it's like learning a relationship and listening, it's like I always encourage people, you'll know internally when the right time is for you to work with sacred plant medicines. And so yeah, that's the way that I've evolved my way of seeing this work. You know, in my teenage years, it was a very different approach. It was like, how deep can I go, how fast and how hard, and that resulted in, you know, what I needed at that time. But I wouldn't recommend that approach.
Mm-hmm. And that is such a powerful message that you were just giving, because it's getting, especially in the conscious and spiritual community, it's becoming more and more modern and cool to work with sacred plant medicine. And what I'm hearing sometimes is, you know, an extreme focus on like, okay, how hard can I go? How deep can I go? And not giving enough time for integration between each of those trips. And I just know for myself, even I'm working with cannabis a lot, and she's such an amazing teacher and healer. And I just know for myself, if I do it too much, it's just, I can't integrate the lessons, and then I still stay stuck in, like, it's almost like she's giving me the same lessons again and again, and it's not as potent as if I'm like really focused, I really set an intention, feel into it, soak in the lesson and the blessing, and then integrate that. And then when I'm ready for another trip, I, you know, set another intention and go deep again. So I love that you were mentioning that, because I feel with all the legalization of cannabis here in the United States and in many states now, it's becoming something like a crutch for a lot of people to hang on to as like a regular thing, that they almost get addicted to that sacred plant medicine. And from that point on, I feel like it kind of loses its sacredness, because we're not holding it with such reference anymore.
Absolutely. And there's, you know, I mean, without, you know, I don't think this is too esoteric for your group, but these plants and beings have their own consciousness, you know, and so when there isn't that respect, they may let you know, or they may not even show up. You know, it's like they're paying attention to what you're needing, and if you don't treat them with respect, there's implications. Just like if you don't treat another human being with respect, there's implications.
That is such a good point, because I think of the people that can be listening to something like this, even though I'm sure it's probably not so much in our audience base, but people that can be listening to this and almost rolling their eyes like, I've never had a sacred experience with plant medicine. Like, these guys are a bunch of yeehaws, and, you know, just that sort of outlook. But I love bringing that perspective to the conversation, that it's like, well, what type of experience do you go into it with? And that's usually what I've been finding the last couple years, that we have been seeing the modernization of a lot of psychedelics, of people talking about the set and setting. That was like, oh, it's like this really big piece of the conversation that's like, oh my gosh, I can go into it with like this different sort of approach. And just because other people or my friends or whoever is using it just to kind of like trip out and party, I can approach it from a different way and possibly experience something that's like way different than if I was just, you know, carnivaling around. And the answer to that is yes. Yes.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I'm involved in a lot of the conversations about the the expansion of the psychedelic field right now, and the awareness of it. And there's a lot of large companies that are starting to build clinics in cities. And what we're really standing for is that it's also important to have the piece of being in a container of nature and having access to those teachers. So when you're working with psychedelics, it can be really useful to have water and just feeling the sense of life force, because we're already so isolated living in human structures and in cities, and especially now during this last 12 months of people being locked up in various stages of quarantine. And it's so important to remember, just like that initial breath and visualization that I was doing. It's like, oh yeah, we're totally connected to everything on this planet, and our body's just going to return to that and get recycled. And so yeah, I think you touched on something really important just around the setting, and that's what I hold dear in my heart.
Absolutely. I feel like it's so, it was very interesting for me when I first started hearing that MAPS was going to be doing a lot of the studies, the peer-reviewed studies for the MDMA and was it psilocybin therapies?
Mm-hmm.
And just doing the research into and listening to, I forget what the founder of MAPS's name is, but listening to
Rick
those.
Doblin.
Yeah, Rick Doblin, listening to those interviews on different podcasts and him just being able to really effectively sort of quiet that narrative that some people have around like, well, you're going to get addicted or stuff like that, where they don't even really understand that it's like with these sort of substances, addiction is sort of something that almost doesn't even like generally like you don't want to that sort of connection is not really usually what's being made.
yeah exactly. The the neurobiology of how it works, it's not necessarily hitting all those receptors that end up in addiction, and in many cases helps treat. You get
And again,
you reach another level.
And again, as you were saying, it's a relationship with the plant. And I feel like if we tend to get addicted to plants or to, in general, to outside things, it kind of can show maybe itself also in our relationships, and we might get addicted to a relationship and show codependency in that way. And then that's the lesson that we're meant to learn from that plant, and realizing, oh wait, I get really addicted to the sacred plant experience. Like, why is this like that? And where am I codependent on someone else's advice and guidance and teachings and healings in my life as well, and where I'm not allowing myself to receive that from within.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, the genesis of Holos comes from Stan Grof's work, which he created a breathwork technique called holotropic breathwork that built on many millennia of different kinds of breathwork that have been yogic traditions and other kinds of transformational breathwork. And holotropic means moving towards wholeness. So the basic premise of Holos is that there is a state of wholeness that we actually already exist in, and we need to remember that. And then there is a state of wholeness that the world and the solar system already exist in, and we just need to remember that. And the basic premise is that there's these holonic phenomena. So holonic is basically like one piece represents the whole. There's like a cascade of wholeness. And one of the practices at Esalen, the Gestalt practice, is very similar in that the sum of the parts is greater than the individual. So it's like you have all these individual whole units, and then they make up a greater whole. And so you need that individual whole unit, which is an individual, a human being that is in harmony with oneself. And then you can build off of that and be in harmony with the world and with nature. So, I just appreciate you bringing that piece forward of like, yeah, you can have addictive tendencies towards any of these things, relationships, towards plant medicine, towards food. And it comes back to, do I feel complete in myself?
Yes.
And that's something that we always are tending to, you know. It's like a house. It's like a house that if we don't tend to it, it starts to kind of get dirty and things fall apart. And so it's like, if we can tend to our first to our own temple and our own psyche, then we have the capacity to come from a really loving and neutral place in our correspondence with other beings.
Mhm.
Yeah. So thanks for bringing that in.
Beautiful. Yes. So I would love to hear. We've been talking a lot about the potential of psychedelic experiences and working with sacred plant medicine, but I would love to hear like an example of what you were going through, like some profound sacred plant medicine trip that you've experienced.
Oh wow. I just have to like go through the files here. Like, what is so profound? Hmm.
Or one of your most favorite ones.
Yeah. I mean, my mind definitely went to 5-MeO, which is like pretty much the most powerful entheogen that I can think of, and brings you into a state of unity consciousness with all things beyond time, or has that potential. And then any of the layers that are between your individuated self and the totality of all that is that exists outside of time, any of those layers where there's a contraction or a trauma can become amplified, and then you have an opportunity to look at them. So it's one of the tools that I use sparingly personally, but is a really powerful tool.
And what is the plant called again?
Oh, it's actually an extract from a toad in the Sonoran Desert, the Bufo alvarius toad. And
Oh.
then 5-MeO used to also be extracted by indigenous cultures from plants in the Amazon. They found little satchels that were thousands of years old that had 5-MeO snuffs, where they would blow the 5-MeO into someone's nose, and then that would put them in a non-ordinary state of consciousness. Um, so I would say that's probably one of the more powerful and memorable pieces. Um, I I've I guess one of my favorite experiences was last week. We had a retreat here in Costa Rica, and we hiked up the tallest waterfall in Costa Rica. It's like 600 feet. You can see it from our property, from the Holos site that we're going to build our retreat center here. And we went to the top of the waterfall, and we drank grandmother medicine there with one of a dear sister of mine. And um, and it wasn't like all the fireworks and visions and all of that. What I really appreciated about that experience was just to be in service. Like, after working with the medicines longer and longer, like, I really love just being of service. And so to see and to hear everyone's experience, and to have like us singing and dancing at the end of the ceremony, in a cave behind a waterfall, was kind of like just so special. It was like, oh yeah, this is what we've been doing as humans for thousands of years, to recharge and to reset and to celebrate and to create connection. And so, yeah, there's, I think, in our world and society, there's this like tendency towards the shiny object of like, oh, here's the experience. Um, and I'm like softening into, oh, the experience is a continuity. It's a like living, breathing, going deeper into sacralizing the mundane, like you said earlier. And so, yeah, that's what I'm learning. I'm learning to just really appreciate the simple.
Mm.
So beautiful. I love that. It seems like the piece that you were just touching on largely has to do with the integration, the really acknowledging of the way that these experiences can make you feel, the things that you can tap into within your human experience as you're experiencing the plant and experiencing each other and experiencing the stories. It's like to really reflect on all of that. It's almost like um, this is one of our great superpowers as human beings, because when we bring those files to the surface and we go through the file and we're like, oh yes, this experience,
Mhm.
and we really allow ourselves to truly integrate with what it was that we were experiencing during that time, all that life can just come alive within you again.
Mhm.
Mhm.
It is so like we are the most magical, sacred, sacred beings. It almost seems too simple, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly. I just thought of another experience that I just feel like sharing because it relates to this place and why Holos is really having our first site, our first neighborhood and retreat center is birthing out of this valley in Costa Rica, the Diamante Valley, because the waters here are so powerful. You know, there's just like there's springs popping up everywhere, and there's these amazing creeks and rivers, and our property is right on the Diamante River. And a couple years ago, when I was first getting to know this property, we had a psilocybin mushroom journey, and I found this little zone. There was like a big rock in the middle of the river, and then there was a waterfall behind it. And I walked around, kind of climbed around, and I ended up under this rock. And the rock was like, yeah, maybe 10 feet across. And it sat on top of this perfect little throne. And there was a rock sitting right in the middle of it, like you could sit on the rock. So I went and I climbed up and I sat on this rock, and there were waterfalls coming down behind me and around me. And then in front of me, the water was continuing on. And there's so many places in this river where it's like that, where there's kind of this like birth canal. And I just started having these songs come to me. And there's something about men and women remembering to sing, like remembering our voice and remembering the sacredness of our voice. And so I was singing, and I just felt these prayers like moving through me, and the songs moving through me and being caught by the water. And again, you probably have like a relatively esoteric group here because you have Sacred Sisterhood. And there's a lot of studies that show that water imprints consciousness, or that consciousness gets imprinted on water. So I was like singing, and this water was like carrying the prayers out into the world. And then a little while later, like a month or two later, I found out that the Gulf Stream, like one of the places that it picks up the most amount of current and moves the most amount of water, is right outside where this river meets the ocean. So I was like, oh, this is the perfect place to pray and to do this work, because it's going to carry that energy into the world. So now we're like moving into the deeper woo-woo of my life. I can like hold the very grounded, like build a house kind of vibration and plant seeds, but also I know there's more happening than what we're aware of. So
And there is no too much boo-boo for this podcast. We can go as deep as you like. I love it. Yeah, I love that so much, because water holds memory. And I also feel like by just like being in that birth canal, it's almost like you remember those old songs and prayers, and like channel them from the ancestors and bringing them back to the earth, and bringing them through your individual voice and your individual way that is adjusted to this modern time. But water holds all those beautiful memories from our ancestors and our past, who were so much deeper connected to the sacred plants, to the star families. Like there's just like nature and cosmos was in sync in the ancient times, ancient, before we officially recorded history. And those indigenous tribes still have that balance within them. And I feel like now I always see it, we're in this consciousness and we're rising in our consciousness. And so when we're in the root chakra consciousness, we're more thinking of survival and, how can we live on this planet? And also, how can we live in sync with nature, and how can we really stay grounded here? But then with like the orange, the sacral chakra consciousness is more like, how can we live in a community? How can I feel like I'm part of a tribe? And then like the yellow consciousness is more like, how can I be individual and just, do what I want? And I feel like for humanity, especially in the Western world, we've been in that navel chakra consciousness a lot, of like, okay, what is good for me? How can I make profit? How can I be successful? How can I reach my goals? And now we're moving up higher and higher in our consciousness with like, going into the heart chakra of like, okay, how can I feel forgiveness for others? How can I really connect on an emotional level? Throat chakra, how can I sing, bring those words back, those prayers, those realizing abracadabra means I create as I speak, realizing the spell that we're creating every single day through our words and thoughts. And then moving into the indigo blue of the third eye, opening up our psychic abilities through the sacred plants, really realizing our oneness with all. And then moving into the crown chakra. And it's so fascinating because the crown chakra is seen as that purple, violet color. And when you go from blue, how do you go to violet? You need to have red. So in order for you to have that beautiful crown chakra purple experience, you need to go back to the roots of the red root chakra, back to where we come from, back from our origins, our ancestors, that's where the indigenous tribes are living, in that beautiful groundedness and in sync with life and knowing how to survive in this natural world. And that is what we're meant to unlock in order to even be able to really experience the crown chakra.
Oh my gosh, I love that so much. I got this tattoo. I don't know that you'll be able to see it, maybe not so much, but at least you can see a piece of it. So it's an Ouroboros around a Taurus, and this little snake is it goes from the red to the purple, and then it turns into an ayahuasca vine. So the tail kind of turns into an ayahuasca vine, and then it blooms as all these flowers. So there's a piece that this blooming of the crown, it also requires the acceptance of death. Like when we're working on all of those pieces that are the root chakra pieces of like our connection to the earth, we're also connecting to the transmutation and to the realization that like these bodies are a gift, but they're not like forever. And so, yeah, I just really appreciate that. That gave me some new insight and things to play with. Thank you.
Oh my gosh, that's so fun. I loved hearing you describe all of that, Hannah. I think just yesterday afternoon, I was contemplating the red and the blue making the purple and being like, oh,
Wow.
yes, that is the way. It's like, just thank you for touching on that. And when
That's
both
why
of
we
you
need a purple party for America.
There you go. Good
Get it, girl.
idea.
So as both of you were speaking, it had me going back to this workshop that I took with Stargazer Lee at Spirit Weavers of the essences and tinctures, and how much that is a process in imbibing the waters that are made with the essences and tinctures with different elements, different minerals, and the consciousness of these pieces. That's how they're able to really help us grow, help us move. And yeah, I guess just thinking back to when I very first started kind of getting into more medicines that I was able to bring into my everyday life. First off, I started with an essence called Lux. It was by Anima Mundi Herbals. Beautiful, beautiful tincture. I've spoken about it in season 1, but it really took a lot of sitting with and checking in with my own beliefs, checking in with my own prejudices or assumptions, judgments, unconscious judgments that like didn't want to believe that I could actually take something and have it help any piece of my life. But this just had a stabilizer, which is like half alcohol to, keep everything from perishing, and water with black tourmaline to help me ground. It was Lux as a spiritual protection one. And then it had white yarrow flower and ocotillo flower. And sitting, like for anyone listening to this right now who's like, oh my gosh, well, how can I bring something like this into my life in a way that maybe isn't so jarring or such a big commitment or such a deep dive in a big journey? Really just sitting at your sacred space and bringing this little vial into your life and imagining you know, when you're taking, whether it's 1 drop, 7 drops, a dropper full, 2 droppers full, you know, you really don't need much, because it's true. The consciousness of water inside of a whole entire jug, all you need is 1 drop to have a piece of each of the pieces of consciousness that are inside of there. All you need is 1 drop to imbibe the next bath of water. And yeah, really just believing that that's inside you, and asking these plants to really help you, asking the crystals to really help you feel into a new space within yourself that maybe you haven't been able to experience before. Pieces like that have absolutely changed my life, and it is something that I love talking with people about on a deeper level, because it is so easy to be like, oh, essences and tinctures, cool, like take a dropper of water, cool. You know, I find myself with people on the bridge a lot. So it's like being on the other side of the bridge and talking with people about, like, yes, this other life, this deeper approach to life is like, it's possible.
Yeah. I got the insight the other day about how important it is to continue the transmission of those teachings of, like, here's these different plants and essences, and you know, those relationships take a long time to build, like the relationship between oneself and a plant. Like, let's just say lavender is very much acknowledged as something that can be very calming for people, you know. And I'm here in this new landscape and jungle, and it's very different than where I grew up in Alaska or where I've been in California the last 10 years. And there's so many plants, and my neighbors, like, they know, like, oh, they've got like orchid collections, and this is good for this and this is good for that. And there's women here that their grandmothers have taught them. But if I was to be on my own here trying to communicate with these plants and like learning what they have to teach me, I couldn't do it in a lifetime. And so what you're describing, you know, as far as like, it's not woo woo. This is like very powerful medicine from the earth, and I think it's our responsibility for those that have the wisdom to share it. And so, thank you for bringing that in.
So beautiful. And so for anyone who's listening to this and feels really inspired to experience hollows, how does it look like to get started, to have an experience with you? How do you hold space?
Yeah. Oh, thank you for asking. We're running private retreats down here in Costa Rica, and we've got one in Guatemala in March, and then we'll likely be running retreats in the US and Canada over the summer, a couple of them. And then we're hoping to open the center here next January. And so we're in the initial stages. We've planted a big food forest, and people are most welcome to come down to Costa Rica and see what we're doing. And we're running little experiences out of existing retreat centers and Airbnbs, and then bringing people up to this sacred land. And ultimately our vision is to have a community of practitioners here, and a community of people that want to really care for these traditions. So we're also developing a neighborhood and selling lots, and it's like a little micro village that we've got started. So people are most welcome, and you know, you can always go to the website holos.global and send an inquiry through there, and I'm generally available and pretty easy to find on the internet. So yeah.
Beautiful. And so what would you say is like a story of one of the participants of your experiences that was really powerful that you would love to share?
Yeah, keeping, you know, anonymity of everyone. And I had this very, very fulfilling experience like a week or so ago, where it was like January 3rd or 4th, and we were about to get started on an 8-day retreat. And this gentleman came in and he was like, I've listened to your podcasts, and you know, like all this nature stuff, you know, like, I don't know, I like to do my psychedelics, and maybe even called them drugs. I like to do my drugs, you know, in cities or, you know, in odd situations. And you know, it was novel. I was like, oh yeah, I mean, I guess I liked that approach when I was a teenager. And but he was kind of adamant about making this point. And then within 3 days of the retreat starting, we had a large ceremony that was very, very powerful. And he asked for a strong experience. And so that's what he got delivered. And mid-experience, he's just like on a rock, kind of like giving a sermon to me about the power of nature and the importance of it as a container. And like even just speaking it, I'm kind of having chills. And he's got the capacity to put together a research project around all of this. And so it was like, it was very fulfilling just to be like, okay, I don't really have to do anything. All I have to do is like put out the signal of what I'm seeing, and then people are going to gravitate and are going to be served by this place and by nature and by the medicines. And none of it is me. It's just like nature is wanting to remind us of the gift that we have of these bodies and of this life. So yeah, that was a great moment.
I
Yeah.
love those experiences whenever people come and are like doubters, and then they're like, oh my gosh, what? Like I've had those experiences often when I sometimes do gigs for, not so much last year, but before I did gigs for like conventions and like business parties, and I was doing astrology or tarot, where I'm like intuitively read people's energies and read their cards. And so there come a lot of people from like very conventional business, logical oriented places and perspectives. Yeah. So very different from my usual clients that are already into all of this. And so whenever someone comes in, usually it's men that come in and be like, yeah, that's like, oh my gosh, you're gonna read my fortune now. Okay, let's see. And then I'm like doing the cards, and I just like on point everything in their deepest soul. And they're like, oh my gosh, how do you know this? Did you talk to someone about me? Like, how is this possible? And I'm like, it's all inside of you. It's your energy. And I usually let them choose their cards, and I connect with the higher self to let them choose the cards that are right for them. Mm-hmm. But it's just, I just love this when someone that comes in and is so strongly opinionated about being against what you're doing, and then you're like showing them the gift and the medicine, and they're like, wow.
Yeah, so good.
So beautiful. And imagine all politicians. It's like, imagine that like for anybody who is in leadership, they are supposed to do sacred plant medicine. Imagine that, like imagine how the world would look like from that perspective. There would be so like probably no wars at all, because everyone's like, well, we're one, so let's figure this out together. Mm-hmm. Imagine those like political conferences and meetings, and they're like sit in circle in nature and do some sacred plant medicine, and then figure out how are we taking care of this planet together.
Yeah,
that's my vision of the future.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. I think it's actually happening quietly behind the scenes. Some of that is happening, and I'm really excited for the world that births out of this pregnant pause that we've been in.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. So beautiful. Wow. Has it been almost an hour already? So beautiful. We really want to thank you for coming on and sharing your wisdom, sharing your insights, sharing your stories. Really, it's been such a beautiful, beautiful experience. And as we move closer to the sacred questions that we ask every guest, we have 3, and they're shorter format. And are you ready?
I'm ready.
This is what we've pretty much been talking about this entire time. What does sacred mean to you?
I guess it means that. It means slowing down, listening, recognizing the stillness behind all movement, and recognizing the unity that we are one sacred part of, that we are one divine spark of, that everything has the potential to teach us.
Mm-hmm. Beautiful. I love that. And what does it mean to, or let's restart. Who is a sacred brother or sister to you, and what does it mean to have a sacred brother and sister?
Oh, lots of people came to mind. I've got so many sacred brothers and sisters. I mean, I have like core teachers, like in India, I have a few, like a grandma and a grandpa that, you know, are like my spiritual guides, I guess you could say. And then I recently definitely feel like I made a sister and a medicine woman here, that we have similar backgrounds in love of the mountains, and she has a very sweet family here. And yeah, it just very organically happened where it was like, oh yeah, you're my sister. And so I wouldn't even know how to name one person. It's like I've got the biggest, sweetest family. They're huge. Yeah.
It's beautiful. And what does it mean for you to have that? What is a sacred brother or a sacred sister to you?
Mm-hmm. I guess we all have different relationships to our family, so we probably all have a different idea of what a sacred brother and sister means. And so for me, with my family, we know that we love each other and that we're like on the same mission in one way or another. And there's a familiarity that goes way back, and that we don't have to be in touch every day, but we know that like, oh yeah, we're family, and we've got each other's back, and if we ever needed anything, we're there for each other. I think that's kind of what it is. And then also, you know, a sacred brother or sister, it's like we hold each other in our highest. It's like we recognize that part of us that is perfect and pure and like doing the best that we can, and so we hold ourselves and each other to that standard.
Mm-hmm.
So beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. How do you turn something normal and mundane into something magical and sacred?
With the quality of our attention. So there's a great book, The Book of Tea, that I read when I was like 18 or something like that. And it's all about the Japanese tea ceremony and the perfection, or just the attention, the quality of attention that goes into the tea ceremony. But it's not what goes into the tea ceremony by itself. It's what goes into finding the clay for the pots and making the pots, and finding the wood for the tea house and making the tea house, and the way that you walk to the tea house. And so it's a quality of attention that makes things sacred. There was a Wendell Berry quote where he's like an ecologist, and it was something like, there is no place on earth that is not sacred, only places that have been desecrated. And so it's like, can we remember to be stewards? Can we remember to be stewards of our kitchens, our gardens, our relationships, our landscapes, our civilization? And that quality of attention, of stewardship and care, is what makes things sacred to me.
I absolutely love that. I love that you just mentioned the stewardship as well, because that was actually one of the things that I wanted to talk about, and I forgot to mention it. So I love that it came up right at the end. Beautiful.
That was the last question that we had listed. How can one become a steward of the land?
Oh yeah, listen and learn, and be humble. Yeah.
Beautiful. So beautiful. Thank you so much for sitting with us, Ian. That was absolutely amazing. So many beautiful channelings that were coming through, and so many beautiful experiences and stories that you shared with us. So we feel so blessed to have you as one of our sacred brothers, and have you been on here with us and sitting here and really sharing that with our audience. And so thank you so much.
Thank you for the invitation.
And we hope to see you soon in Costa Rica.
Yes,
yep. Always welcome.
I was going to say, when you said Diamante River, my husband and I are looking through Airbnbs to potentially stay out there for a few months and potentially move out there relatively soon with everything that's going on out here. And I was looking at a place that's by the Diamante River, and
amazing.
I was curious to open dialogue with you on that in a little bit.
Check in with me. Yeah.
Yeah, and my husband and I are going through the same. So we actually are the ones that inspired Brett to do it.
They incepted us, and the entire time we've been like, man, those guys, they're gonna go to Costa Rica.
Oh my gosh.
And I've
That's
just
amazing.
I've been witnessing from afar, and then so much is turning out here that my husband, he's intaking a lot of information about, the realities of a lot of what's going down here. And he's like, I don't know, even if something doesn't like happen, some big thing doesn't happen, what if we just have an adventure, shake things up, go live somewhere for a year? It's already been something that we've been thinking about for a couple years. And he's like, I don't know, I think maybe it's time. And we've been filling into a lot of the guidance, doing tarot draws and receiving, and arrows are pointing to yes right now, which feels very, very strange. This has only been the last week or two of development, so very fast movement.
Amazing.
We're fast movers.
Pretty much since when we talked to Ed, because 2 weeks ago we interviewed Ed. He was the first one in the Emperor season, and pretty much after that it's like planted a seed.
That's
he's
so
also
good.
in Costa Rica.
Here's what it looks like.
Just a
So
tease
come on
now.
Yeah, it's ready for you and welcome. There's just epic waterfalls right down there, and then there's a 600-foot waterfall right over there. So
beautiful. Thank you for holding spaces that let people know that it's possible to move to such beautiful, connected, earthen spaces of the earth. So beautiful.
Well, again, we wish you a beautiful, blessed rest of your day, and we will talk soon.
Great. Thank you so much.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.